Let me introduce the panel. First, we will hear from two mothers who have personally experienced the grief of losing a child to combat, and we appreciate more than words can describe your courage in coming here and understanding that what you are trying to do is to prevent other families from experiencing the tragedies that you have experienced. So we thank Susan Selke, whose son Clay Hunt, a Marine Corps combat veteran, took his life after returning from Afghanistan. And then we'll hear from Valerie Pilata from the state of Vermont. Valerie's son Joshua, a Vermont National Guard combat veteran, also served in Afghanistan and took his own life just several months ago. We'll then hear from Master Sergeant Vincent Venata, a participant in the Wounded Warrior Project's Combat Stress Recovery Program. We thank him very much for being here. We'll then hear from Dr. Elsbeth Ritchie, the Chief Clinical Officer of the District of Columbia's Department of Mental Health and a member of the Institute of Medicine's committee that produced the report Treatment for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder in Military and Veteran Populations. Dr. Ritchie, thank you for being here. And then we'll hear from the Executive Director of Team Red, White, and Blue, Blaine Smith. I would ask the clerk to turn off the clock for Mrs. Selke and Mrs. Pilata, so you just don't worry about the time. You take as much time as you need to say whatever you want to say, and we're extremely appreciative that you're here. Mrs. Selke, do you want to begin?
Thank you. Chairman Sanders, Ranking Member Burr, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about this critically important topic of mental health care access at the VA, suicide among veterans, and especially about the story and experience of our son, Clay. My name is Susan Selke, and I'm accompanied here by my husband, Richard. I'm here today as the mother of Clay Hunt, a Marine Corps combat veteran who died by suicide in March 2011 at the age of 28. Clay enlisted in the Marine Corps in May of 2005 and served in the infantry. In January of 2007, Clay deployed to Iraq's Anbar province, close to Fallujah. Shortly after arriving in Iraq, Clay was shot through the wrist by a sniper's bullet that barely missed his head. After he returned to 29 Palms in California to recuperate, Clay began experiencing many symptoms of post-traumatic stress, including panic attacks, and was diagnosed with PTS later that year. Following the recuperation from his gunshot wound, Clay attended and graduated from the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School in March of 2008. A few weeks after graduation, Clay deployed again, this time to southern Afghanistan. Much like his experience during his deployment to Iraq, Clay witnessed and experienced the loss of several fellow Marines during his second deployment. Clay received a 30% disability rating from the VA for his PTS. After discovering that his condition prevented him from maintaining a steady job, Clay appealed the 30% rating, only to be met with significant bureaucratic barriers, including the VA losing his files. 18 months later, and 5 weeks after his death, Clay's appeal finally went through, and the VA rated Clay's PTS at 100%. Clay exclusively used the VA for his medical care after separating from the Marine Corps. Immediately after his separation, Clay lived in the Los Angeles area and received care at the VA Medical Center there in LA. Clay constantly voiced concerns about the care he was receiving, both in terms of the challenges he faced with scheduling appointments, as well as the treatment he was receiving for PTS, which consisted primarily of medication. He received counseling only as far as brief discussions regarding whether the medication he was prescribed was working or not. If it was not, he would be given a new medication. Clay used to say, "I'm a guinea pig for drugs. They'll put me on one thing, I'll have side effects, and then they'll put me on something else." In late 2010, Clay moved briefly to Grand Junction, Colorado, where he also used the VA there, and then finally home to Houston to be closer to our family. The Houston VA would not refill his prescriptions that he had received from the Grand Junction VA because they said that prescriptions were not transferable and a new assessment would have to be done before his medications could be re-prescribed. Clay had only 2 appointments in January and February of 2011, and neither was with a psychiatrist. It wasn't until March 15th that Clay was finally able to see a psychiatrist at the Houston VA Medical Center. But after the appointment, Clay called me on his way home and said, "Mom, I can't go back there. The VA is way too stressful and not a place I can go. I'll have to find a vet center or something." Just 2 weeks after his appointment with a psychiatrist at the Houston VA Medical Center, Clay took his own life. After Clay's death, I personally went to the Houston VA to retrieve his medical records, and I encountered an environment that was highly stressful. There were large crowds. No one was at the information desk, and I had to flag down a nurse to ask directions to the medical records area. I cannot imagine how anyone dealing with mental injuries like PTS could successfully access care in such a stressful setting without exacerbating their symptoms. Clay was consistently open about having post-traumatic stress and survivor's guilt, and he tried to help others coping with similar issues. He worked hard to move forward and found healing by helping people, including participating in humanitarian work in Haiti and Chile after devastating earthquakes. He also started a public service advertising campaign aimed at easing the transition for his fellow veterans, and he helped wounded warriors in long-distance road biking events. Clay fought for veterans in the Hall of Congress and participated in the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America Storm the Hill to advocate for legislation to improve the lives of veterans and their families. Clay's story details the urgency needed in addressing this issue. Despite his proactive and open approach to seeking care to address his injuries, the VA system did not adequately address his needs. Even today, we continue to hear about both individual and systemic failures by the VA to provide adequate care and address the needs of veterans. Not one more veteran should have to go through what Clay went through with the VA after returning home from war. Not one more parent should have to testify before a congressional committee to compel the VA to fulfill its responsibilities to those who served and sacrificed. I understand that Senator Burr and Senator McCain have just introduced an updated and improved version of the Suicide Prevention for American Veterans Act, or SAVE Act, that is similar to the House version of the bill, and have also named the bill after our son Clay, like the House. We thank them for stepping up to try to get something meaningful done to address this issue. The reforms, evaluations, and programs directed by this legislation will be critical to helping the VA better serve and treat veterans suffering from mental injuries from war. Had the VA been doing these things all along, it very well may have saved Clay's life. We know that time is short in this Congress, but we hope that Majority Leader Reid will prioritize getting this done for our veterans before you all leave for the holidays. Mr. Chairman, Richard and I again appreciate the opportunity to share Clay's story and our recommendations for how we can help ensure the VA will uphold its responsibility to properly care for America's veterans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Zelke. Mrs. Plata.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Valerie Plata. If you could just bear with me, it's been only 6 weeks since my son ended his life. I felt it was very important to be here in front of you. So important, this is not in my testimony, but I don't fly. And this is the 3rd time I've flown in my life. That's how important I feel this is. People say our son Joshua was a hero. His last words on Facebook were, "I see death in every thought. They taught me how to put this uniform on. I just can't get it off." These are lyrics from A Soldier's Memoir by Mitch Rossell. Our son's last text to his father was a link to this song. He sent this song to all of his friends and his loved ones. He wanted everyone to have a better understanding of what he was going through. This song describes what PTSD was like for him. I encourage you to look it up online. At 3:37 on the morning of September 23rd, 2014, my husband and I were awakened by a loud knocking at the door. As I looked out the window to see who was knocking at that hour, I saw 2 Burlington police officers. My heart started to race as I knew it had to have something to do with my son. He's been arrested, was my first thought. My head started pounding and my ears started ringing. I felt like I was going to pass out. I opened the door and one of them said, "Valerie Pilata?" "Yes," I heard myself say through the ringing of my ears. "Is your husband here?" "Yes." "Gregory Pilata?" I vaguely heard my husband say yes. "May we come in?" "No, no, no," is what I wanted to say. "I'm very sorry to tell you that your son is deceased." "No, this can't be true. I thought he had been arrested. His PTSD was bound to get him arrested at some point. He had so much anger and so much pain. He's in jail. He's not dead. This can't be." I knew in my gut that my son had ended his life before I even asked them the question. Our son was pronounced dead from a self-inflicted wound at 2:17 a.m., September 23rd, 2014, at the age of 25. His death certificate should have stated the cause of death as PTSD or traumatic brain injury, not from a self-inflicted wound. Joshua Rodney Pilata left behind a childless mother and father, countless friends and loved ones, and his brothers in arms who he had trusted his life. The sleepless nights, the headaches, the physical pain, the anger, not eating, the nightmares, these are all signs of PTSD. Not only has PTSD taken the life of our son, but it has taken the life out of us. Our spirit left the day our son died. We lost our only child to something that should have been prevented. We used to have so much spirit. The light, that love, that spirit is gone and will be gone forever in us. We cry every single day. We are racked with guilt every single day. My son asked me to borrow money, and I thought the tough love route would be the way to go. And I told him no. I hadn't talked to my son for 9 months before he ended his life. It takes all that we have to get out of bed after another night of not sleeping because our minds race with thoughts of how we could have done things differently. Driving and doing everyday tasks are a challenge. We struggle to get through a shower without breaking down. We force ourselves to eat and to go to work. We just go through the motions. I forget which road I normally drive down. I haven't cooked a meal since our son died. My husband went through a traffic light and didn't know what color it was when he went through it. Just this past Saturday night, he was coming home, and as he drove down our street, it didn't look familiar to him. He thought he was on the wrong street. He didn't recognize it. We've been living on our street since 1998. This is our life. Our minds are at the funeral home, crying over our son's body as it lays cold. We're kissing him and hugging him and trying to wake ourselves up from this awful, horrible nightmare. Our minds are at the Veterans Cemetery in Randolph, Vermont, the place our son was laid to rest, a place we haven't yet been able to visit. Our minds are in Afghanistan, wishing we could have been there to protect him, to shelter him from the pain he endured for 4 years. How can our son be dead from a self-inflicted wound, a wound caused by PTSD, invisible wounds nobody could ever heal? Nobody could heal. Our son was deployed to a combat outpost in Afghanistan, COP Herrera. We hadn't realized how dangerous a location it was until August 22nd, 2010. I received a call from our son that day. "Mom, I can't talk. I'm okay, but I can't talk. You'll find out soon enough. I just want you to know that I'm okay. We're shutting down communications for now." Then I received a call from one of my friends, another mom from my son's unit. 2 soldiers had been killed in action. Staff Sergeant Stephen DeLuzio from Connecticut and Sergeant Tristan Southworth from Hardwick, Vermont. I only just found out that our son was standing right next to Tristan when he was killed. His brothers had to pull him away because he was in shock. He couldn't move. Our son's life, the lives of his brothers in arms, and the lives of our families have changed forever. They changed forever that day. Our son was awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor that day for valorous achievement while assigned as a mortar assistant gunner for 3rd Platoon Alpha Company. His selfless service and dedication to duty were in keeping with the highest tradition of military service. Just 2 years later, on August 22nd, 2012, our son posted the following on his Facebook page. I don't know where to start. Southie and Dee were loved by all people that knew them. It didn't matter what happened. Those two would always have a smile on their face. When they walked into a room, they had the power to make everyone's day just a little better, just with their presence. They were truly the best people that I have ever known, and they paid the ultimate sacrifice for the freedom that so many people take for granted nowadays. Not a day goes by that I don't replay this horrible day in my head, always thinking what I could have done differently, always thinking about why I'm here and these guys aren't. Why am I so special to make it home? They had a hell of a lot more going for them when they got back. 2 years ago today, the world lost two amazing men that can never be replaced. Gone but never forgotten. Rest in peace, Staff Sergeant Stephen DeLuzio and Sergeant Tristan Southworth. He then wrote, always wishing it was me instead of them. He lived with pain every single day, emotional, physical, and spiritual. He saw their faces every single day. What our son and his brothers endured that year of deployment is something you would never wish on your worst enemy. The things they saw on deployment are burned into their heads, visuals that aren't going away. Suicide bombers, seeing their limbs, scalps, and a head just lying on the ground with the eyes open. A young boy who was doing yard work hit a Russian landmine. He was missing his face, an arm, and some fingers on one hand. This boy choked to death on his blood in a medevac. One of my son's best friends was his escort. A little girl who came in for treatment. She came in because her father and uncle had burned her feet so badly that she almost lost them. These are the visuals that our young men and women are seeing and coming home with. Our son was a casualty of war, just like Tristan and Stephen. There were over 900 people at our son's funeral. 900 people. If you only knew. If that is the number of people affected by just one veteran's suicide, imagine the number affected by, now the number is 23 veteran suicides a day. Multiply 23 by 900. Our son lost his battle with PTSD, and so did the rest of his family and friends. For the rest of our lives, we will wonder if we could have done something different. Everyone always says, if there's anything you need, let me know. The only thing we need and wish for is to have our son back, and we don't have the heart to tell them that that's not something they can give us. What we ask for now is an end to the bureaucracy and getting our veterans the resources they need, so no other mom, dad, husband, wife, children, loved ones have to go through this tragedy. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Bellata, for your testimony. And members of the panel, thank you all for your excellent testimony. Let me start with Mrs. Selke and Mrs. Bellata, and you will answer this in any way that you want. Thinking back about the experiences that your sons went through, what recommendations would you make to the VA as to how they could have responded better to the needs of your sons? The Secretary was sitting here right now. What should they have done that would have prevented the tragedy? Mrs. Selke, do you want to begin?
I think in Clay's case, I don't know that I can pinpoint any one particular thing. The buildup, the difficulty in navigating the VA, from the month that he left the service and started accessing VA care, that was summer of 2009, and that was just when the new GI Bill was going into effect. He was very delayed in getting his benefits to start school.
So he had to deal
going
with the
back to-
bureaucracy and the delays of getting benefits, which were important to him.
He did,
And as I recall, he also had difficulty holding down a job because of,
exactly. It was during that summer, he was working in a bike shop, and because of his panic attacks, he would have to leave and go outside to collect himself often, and he just had to be let go because it was interfering. So that is when he realized he needed to make his appeal on his disability benefits. as well. So he's battling getting his education benefits in place, as well as dealing with that. In making that appeal for his disability benefits, that's when the VA lost his file, and he had to recreate the medical records for the previous 2 years since he had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress in order to make that appeal. So from day one when he got out, he began experiencing the difficulty of just navigating through the system. As far as the medical part of it, again, I said in my testimony that predominantly the medication was the way that he was dealt with.
Sounds like
Very
he
difficult.
never received a warm hand that said, hey, relax, we're with you, we're going to get you through this. We're going to get you through the benefits issue, we're going to get you through the mental health thing.
Yeah.
I'm here for you. It
Right.
sounds like he didn't get that.
I look back and realize now how proactive Clay was, how determined he was that these were the benefits promised to him. He needed them, and he was going to do what it took to get those. And it makes me realize how many others are out there that may not have tried so hard. There's so many that just say, I give up. You know, I'm just not going to fool with it. I give up. The medication was a real stumbling block for him. It was very frustrating to know that he needed help in some way. He knew he was not functioning the way that he should be. And yet the place that he felt was his comfort zone, the place that he had been promised would take care of him as a veteran, there just didn't seem to be very many options other than the medication route. And that just proved to be very difficult for him. When he came back to Houston, and those last really 10 weeks before he saw the psychiatrist, it just is uncanny how something can go wrong. It seems like something goes wrong so fast, but it's a buildup, and there was just something that was the tipping point. And I think his interaction with VA, with medication, he saw that psychiatrist. I know they testified earlier about different healthcare professionals, mental health care professionals. He saw 3 or 4 people before he ever got to the psychiatrist. Well, he had been treated for PTS for 3 years, so to start back over and have to go through all that intake, or whatever the term is, was very frustrating. And I didn't tell this in my testimony. When he saw the psychiatrist and he asked to be prescribed the medication that he had been on while he was active duty, and that was Lexapro, because that had worked for him with the least amount of side effects. When he left active duty and went to VA, he was not given that drug. He was changed to a generic of another drug, of Celexa. Those drugs are so specific. I mean, it takes a long time to find the one that works. And when you do, it's just incomprehensible to me that if it's documented, it's in your records, that finally you found one that worked, and just because you transfer out and are under VA care, then you're told, well, we don't prescribe that right off the bat. We're going to do this. So when he came back and saw that psychiatrist, he said, I would like to be put back on that because it worked better for me. And he agreed and said yes, and wrote the prescription. Clay goes to the pharmacy at the VA. He waits 2 hours. In addition, he had sleeping problems, and he was given a prescription for Ambien. So he goes to the pharmacy. They do not stock Lexapro because at that time there was not a generic. And he was told, we can get this for you, but we'll have to send it to you by mail. Should reach you within 10 days. So he left with a prescription for Ambien, nothing for anxiety, no antidepressant, being told it would come in the mail within 10 days. He was so in his voice when he called, and I said this in my testimony, that he called and said, I can't go back there. He was just very, the word dispirited, just, it was sort of like I have fought for everything, and now here I go with another battle, another hurdle to jump through, and it seems unnecessary. They're just, looking back, some of that just seems unnecessary. The medication for malaria that was brought up by someone, Clay's unit, he was part of 2-7 in the Marines, and one of his comrades called us last week, and he was just distraught. He said, we have lost that combat in 2008 in Afghanistan, that 2-7 group, they lost 20 in combat, and they have now recently lost their 20th to suicide. And he just was beside himself. He knew that Richard and I were involved in proactively trying to seek better help for them, and they are struggling. They are worried about each other, and I can't even fathom those numbers. And he brought up the malaria medication. He said, we're wondering, because they were all given, they called it Malaria Monday. They would be given the pill on Mondays every week, and evidently there were side effects that were not fun. But we have worried about Ambien as we were meeting other families who had lost loved ones to suicide, veterans to suicide. It has been uncanny how many of them have been on Ambien, and it just is
My
worrisome.
time is long expired, but I wanted to ask Mrs. Pilata the same question, thinking back.
Thank you. I think Josh went through the same things that Clay did with the bureaucracy. Josh actually was only in the Guard for a few years. He joined on in 2009 because he knew he was going to Afghanistan, and he went right to basic training, and then they went right to deployment. So when he was over there, he got some back injuries along with the PTSD. So for him to try and get treatment for his back, he had to drive an hour and a half to White River Junction in his Jeep Wrangler, and then an hour and a half back, which he did not do because he couldn't deal with the pain. He was on medications, which, in fact, the VA has since sent us more automatic refills since he's been deceased. I try to go back and figure things out. What went wrong? What could we have changed? I know the fight for his disability was an extremely agonizing process, and he was still only diagnosed at 65%. He was medically discharged from the Guard in February, I believe. And I've since talked to buddies that he was deployed with, and every single one of them that I've talked to has said, we don't want the medications. We feel like zombies. We don't want counselors who are checking their watches while we're in our counseling session. We don't want a counselor to have to look through my file to find out what my name is. Josh fortunately had a great counselor, and he actually had started going back to counseling a few weeks before he ended his life. And he was making headway. He had financial difficulties. He ended his 4-year-long relationship with his girlfriend, which he described to his father as feeling like a weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. He had a job that he really liked, but that he was working in a deli downtown Burlington, and they were closing. And he felt like it was 3 steps forward and 4 steps back. Going back, I don't know what one thing could have changed or what we could have done different. I think, as one of his buddies who was with him said, I think Josh just gave up the fight, and I think it was a little too late. He had a veterans outreach worker who gave up on him. He didn't want the help, so he said, I've got other veterans who want the help, so, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've gone way, way over my time, so you take as much time as you
No.
need. Senator Jones.
That's no problem because your comments are so incredibly compelling.